Welcome to Chintu's cyber world. Chintu was a legend, well, in his own mind at least. He ran Chintu's cyber zone, a dusty internet cafe in the sleepy town of Darbanagar. He knew everything about everyone who came online, mostly because they shouted their passwords across the room. He was a master of minesweeper and a champion at typing with one hand, the other hand busy shoveling samosas. But Chintu had a secret. He wasn't just a cyber cafe owner, he was Agent Chintu, junior trainee at RAW, India's super-secret spy agency. He'd even managed to download a ringtone that sounded vaguely like James Bond, but with a sitar. Chintu's days were filled with more daydreams than actual work. He imagined himself as a suave, secret agent, dodging lasers and seducing femme fatales. In reality, his most daring mission involved replacing the leaky water cooler bottle. He dreamt of high-stakes chases and exotic locales, but his reality was confined to the four walls of his cyber cafe, filled with the aroma of instant noodles and the clicking of keyboards. He longed for action, adventure, and maybe a free plate of pakoras. Little did he know, his life was about to take a hilarious turn. Get ready to laugh, because Agent Chintu is about to stumble his way into the mission of a lifetime. One Tuesday, as Chintu was battling a particularly stubborn stain on his favorite I Love Samosas t-shirt, his RAW phone buzzed. This was no ordinary Nokia ringtone. This was the sound of opportunity. Or maybe it was just a low battery warning. He fumbled for the phone, almost dropping his prized samosa in the process. A message flashed on the screen marked Top Secret. Finally, some action. Agent Cucumber, the message began. Chintu winced. They still hadn't gotten his name right. Report to HQ immediately. Operation Samosa is a go. Samosa, his favorite. This had to be his big break. He grabbed his most inconspicuous disguise, a fake mustache that looked suspiciously like a caterpillar, and hailed an auto rickshaw. RAW headquarters, he announced, trying to sound like he did this every day. The driver just chuckled. Sure, kid. And I'm taking you to meet Spider-Man. At RAW headquarters, confusion reigned. Agents dashed about, shouting into headsets and spilling chai. Chintu, feeling a little out of place, tried to blend in by putting on a pair of oversized sunglasses. He bumped into a tall, stern-looking woman with a clipboard. "Excuse me, madam," he said, trying to sound official. "Where do I report for Operation Samosa?" The woman raised an eyebrow. "Samosa? That's for Agent Tamarind, not Cucumber." Chintu's heart sank. He'd been mistaken for another agent. Again. Despite the mix-up, Agent Chintu was determined to prove himself. He snuck into the briefing room, his heart pounding like a Bollywood drum solo. On screen was Don Dhanraj, a notorious international smuggler with a penchant for gold chains and bad puns. He was planning to sell a top-secret Indian satellite chip that could control the world's samosa supply. Okay, maybe not the samosas, but it was something equally important. Probably. The real Agent Tamarind, a muscular giant with a shaved head, was being briefed on the mission. Chintu listened intently, his mind racing. He had to stop Dhanraj even if it meant going rogue. The mission briefing was like a scene straight out of a Bollywood film, but with less singing and dancing, and more talk about microchips and encryption keys. Chintu, however, was more interested in the gadgets. He marveled at the laser pens, the grappling hooks, and the exploding pens. He'd only ever gotten to test out the exploding pens, and let's just say his last performance review had mentioned excessive use of office supplies. He snuck a look at Agent Tamarind's arsenal. He had a watch that doubled as a blowtorch, a belt buckle that shot tear gas, and a shoe that could... Well, Chintu wasn't quite sure what the shoe did, but it looked impressive. Chintu's own standard-issue spy kit was a bit less glamorous. He had a tube of superglue that he mostly used to fix his broken flip-flops, a pack of chewing gum that was supposed to be explosive but tasted suspiciously like coriander, and a pen that could supposedly write underwater, though he'd yet to find a reason to test that out. But Chintu was nothing if not resourceful. He had a plan so crazy it just might work. Maybe. Chintu knew he needed a foolproof disguise to infiltrate Don Dhanraj's inner circle. He rummaged through his bag of tricks, pulling out a collection of wigs, fake noses, and Groucho Marx glasses. He tried on a blonde wig, but it looked like a dead cat had taken up residence on his head. He attempted a fake beard, but it promptly fell off, landing in his cup of chai. Finally, he settled on a pair of oversized sunglasses and a fake mustache that he secured with a generous amount of tape. He looked in the mirror and struck a pose. "Don't worry, India," he muttered to his reflection. "Agent Chintu is on the case." His reflection just stared back at him, unimpressed. He had to admit, his disguises were more Mr. Bean than James Bond. Once, he tried to go undercover as a wealthy socialite by wearing his mother's best sari. Let's just say it involved a lot of safety pins, a near wardrobe malfunction, and a very angry auntie who chased him down the street with a rolling pin. He knew his strengths didn't lie in blending in. He was more of a standout and hoped for the best kind of spy. He grabbed his trusty chola bag, stuffed with his laptop, a charger, and a backup supply of samosas, and set off on his mission, his mismatched outfit and questionable disguise doing little to mask his air of bewildered determination. He might not have been the most inconspicuous agent, but what he lacked in subtlety, he made up for in enthusiasm, and a healthy dose of clumsiness. This was Agent Chintu's time to shine, even if it meant tripping over his own 2 feet and landing face first into the spotlight. Section 5. Golu, the feathery sidekick. Now every good spy needs a sidekick. James Bond had Q, Ethan Hunt had Luther, and Chintu, well, he had Golu, a street-smart pigeon with a taste for discarded samosa crumbs, and a knack for showing up at the most inconvenient times. Golu wasn't exactly a trained operative. He mostly just pecked at shiny objects and left a trail of feathers in his wake. But to Chintu, Golu was his confidant, his partner in crime fighting, and the only living being who didn't laugh at his disguises. At least, not to his face. Chintu found Golu perched on a window ledge, pecking at a discarded samosa crust. "Golu, my feathered friend," Chintu whispered, offering him a piece of his own samosa. "We've got a case," Golu cooed in response, which Chintu took as a sign of eager agreement. He knew he couldn't exactly send Golu into a high-stakes poker game with a secret message strapped to his leg. But he had a feeling Golu's uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time, or at least the most hilarious place at the most chaotic time, would come in handy. And so, armed with his questionable spy gadgets, his even more questionable disguises, and his feathery sidekick, Agent Chintu set off to save the day, or at least try not to make the situation worse. Which, knowing Chintu, was a mission in itself. The auction for the satellite chip was being held on Don Dhanraj's private yacht, a monstrosity of gold plating and bad taste named the Dhanraj Diamond. Chintu, disguised as a waiter, his disguise involved a borrowed waiter's jacket that was 2 sizes too small and a tray of lukewarm pakoras, had managed to sneak on board. He scanned the room, his eyes searching for Don Dhanraj. The place was crawling with shady-looking individuals in expensive suits and even more expensive sunglasses. Chintu, in his ill-fitting waiter disguise, stuck out like a sore thumb, or perhaps a samosa in a fruit basket. He bumped into a burly man with a gold chain as thick as his wrist. "Watch it, kid," the man growled, spilling his drink down Chintu's shirt. "Sorry, sir," Chintu mumbled, trying to discreetly wipe the spilled drink on his already stained waiter's jacket. He spotted Don Dhanraj on a raised platform, surrounded by bodyguards. He was a short, stocky man with a pencil-thin mustache and a permanent scowl etched on his face. He was holding court, his voice booming across the room as he auctioned off the satellite chip. Chintu knew he had to act fast. He spotted Golu perched on a chandelier, observing the scene with beady eyes. "Golu, my feathered friend," Chintu whispered, tossing a pakora towards his avian companion. "Create a distraction." Golu, startled by the flying snack, let out a startled squawk and took flight, flapping his wings frantically and sending a cascade of feathers raining down on the unsuspecting guests. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed, swatting at the air and each other, convinced they were under attack by a flock of mutant pigeons. Don Dhanraj, momentarily distracted, dropped the satellite chip. It bounced off a table, ricocheted off a bodyguard's head, and landed right in Chintu's pakora tray. Chintu stared at the chip, nestled amongst the onion bhajis and samosas, and then back at the scene of utter pandemonium unfolding around him. He had the chip. But now what? He couldn't just walk out of there. The place was swarming with Don Dhanraj's goons, and they looked less than pleased about the pigeon-induced chaos. He needed to get to a phone, contact Raw headquarters, and report his accidental success. He just hoped they wouldn't be too upset about the whole going rogue and involving a pigeon part of his mission. He clutched the pakora tray to his chest, the weight of the world, or at least the fate of a very important satellite chip, resting on his samosa-stained shirt. As he made his way through the panicking crowd, desperately trying to avoid eye contact and spilled champagne, he spotted an open door leading to the deck. He slipped through it, hoping to find a quiet corner where he could contact HQ and maybe enjoy a pakora or two while he waited for backup. Little did he know his adventure was far from over. The next morning, Chintu was back at his cyber cafe, nursing a massive headache and a bruised ego. The Raw headquarters had called him all right, to yell at him. Apparently, creating a distraction didn't involve unleashing a flock of pigeons on an international arms dealer's yacht. Who knew? He'd been demoted back to agent who brings snacks duty. But Chintu wasn't fazed. He had a story to tell. And who better to tell it to than his captive audience of internet-addicted teenagers and bored housewives? As he reconnected the cafe's Wi-Fi router, which had mysteriously stopped working after a particularly vigorous game of Minesweeper, he regaled his audience with tales of his daring escapades. He embellished, of course. A lot. The pigeon became a trained eagle. The pakora tray became a bulletproof briefcase. And Don Dhanraj, well, let's just say he was now single-handedly responsible for global warming and the common cold. His audience listened, captivated as he spun his yarn. Even if they didn't believe a word of it, they appreciated a good story. Word spread like wildfire through the small town of Daba Nagar. Agent Chintu, the unassuming cyber cafe owner, was a secret hero. He'd saved the day, thwarted an evil genius, and all before lunchtime. The story, exaggerated with each retelling, took on a life of its own. Soon, everyone in town knew about Agent Chintu and his daring exploits. Mothers wanted him to babysit their children. Surely a trained spy could handle a toddler. Grandfathers wanted to swap war stories. Apparently, his grandfather had single-handedly defeated an army of squirrels during World War II. Chintu, ever the entrepreneur, saw an opportunity. He painted a new sign for his cafe. Below Chintu's cyber zone, in slightly smaller letters, he added, "Spy training offered, samosas included." Business boomed. Chintu might not have been a real spy, but he was a darn good storyteller. And in a world obsessed with the internet, sometimes a good story, especially one involving pigeons and exploding chewing gum, was all you needed to be a legend. And so, Agent Chintu continued his double life, serving up internet access and tall tales in equal measure. He might not have been saving the world, but he was making his little corner of it a whole lot more entertaining. And really, what more could you ask for?